right, hello everyone. This is Dr. Franklin Roush. I'm getting ready to give the true-false part of the review for exam 3. I just wanted to point out I use, to record what I'm doing here, I use OBS. If you ever want to have a screen capture software, this is one that's free. It's really nice. I think it works well. But let's go on and start with the true and false. So what I'll do is I'll just try and go through these. I'll have a little bit of a little pause between when I say whether it's true or false, and then I'll give you the answer. So I would encourage you to try and do it on your own. Close my email so we won't have any more interruptions. So let's begin. So true or false? Sun Yat-sen was a Chinese nationalist and Christian who saw the U.S. as a model for China. That is true. Chu Jin was a nationalist who believed feminism threatened China. That is false. Chu Jin believed that China was a feminist and a nationalist, right? Remember, she was similar in ways to Charlotte Corday. She actually was part of a plot to overthrow the Qing emperor. You may remember there was a picture of her with a dagger. Matthew Perry was an American naval officer who used his fleet to threaten Japan into opening to the outside world. That is true. Shishi were Japanese samurai who initially opposed foreign influence and supported the Meiji Emperor against the Tokugawa. That is true. The Tokugawa were the shoguns. The Shishi were upset that the Tokugawa had allowed Japan to be forced to open its doors to the West, and they wanted to assist in overthrowing the Tokugawa emperor or Tokugawa shogun and restoring the Meiji Emperor to power. Meiji was the emperor restored to power in the Meiji Restoration. That is a true statement. Fukuzawa Yukichi believed that Western civilization would harm Japan and therefore focused on self-strengthening. That is false. Fukuzawa Yukichi thought that Western civilization was something that should be imitated, and he believed that Japanese could imitate Western civilization because it was actually a kind of universal civilization, and by understanding kind of the natural rules that govern the universe, like science, the Japanese could become powerful and modern while still remaining Japanese. So this is very different in a sense from self-strengthening. Chinese practice self-strengthening. You remember that from the second exam, where they basically just tried to buy Western guns and Western weapons and then not change anything else, not change the politics, not change the society. Fukuzawa Yukichi said, no, we can totally change everything in accordance with civilization, because it's a kind of universal civilization. It's just the natural law of the world, and we can still keep our Japanese identity while doing so. And this allowed Japan to engage in radical revolutions that allowed the Japanese to win the war against China in 1894 to 95. Min was a Korean queen who believed that Japan would help protect Korea from Russia. That is false. She tried to prevent the Japanese from expanding their power into Korea, and the Japanese government had her assassinated. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand was the main cause of World War I. That is a true statement.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I don't know if you heard that. That was my son there agreeing with me. I'm recording this in my home office with my two kids. One is playing Switch and the other is playing Fortnite. The Battle of the Somme was a great British victory that helped shorten World War I considerably. That is false. The Battle of Somme was a kind of a British victory, but it really was not significant. It did not help shorten the war. A lot of people died without much changing, and that's kind of a basic metaphor for how World War I worked. Lusitania was the name of an American battleship that helped in World War I. That is false. The Lusitania was a passenger ship that was torpedoed by the Germans, and there were some Americans on board, and it nearly led to the Americans going to war against Germany. Later on, this did make the Americans angry, so later on when there were more problems, Americans kind of remembered this, said, yeah, this is one more reason why we need to go to war against Germany. The Zimmermann Telegram was a German attempt to get Canada to invade the United States. That is false. It was a German attempt to get Mexico to invade the United States. Just to kind of put these things together, Mexico was kind of going through a revolution this time period, so it really didn't have the capability to do this. So this was kind of a weird thing for the Germans to do, but they did it. Woodrow Wilson supported national self-determination, and because of that was opposed to the League of Nations. That is false. Woodrow Wilson did indeed support national self-determination. He thought any nation in Europe that wanted its own country should get one. But he also supported the League of Nations, which was basically kind of like a prototype of the United Nations. John Maynard Keynes believed that deficit spending was key to rescuing countries from the Great Depression. That is true. Franklin Roosevelt believed that deficit spending would lead the United States down the road to communism and therefore opposed it. That is false. He engaged in a lot of deficit spending as part of the New Deal. He followed Keynes, and that was a way of kind of preserving capitalism by reforming it. Porfirio Diaz was a caudillo who ruled Mexico for a long time, but was eventually overthrown in a revolution. That is true. Francisco Madero established a military dictatorship in Mexico and was assassinated because he was so cruel. That is false. Francisco Madero was believed in democracy. He was democratically elected and became president of Mexico, and he tried to unite Mexicans. So the he kept the old military commanders in charge. He said, "You guys can still stay. We're going to build a kind of unified Mexico, all of us together." And they responded by assassinating him. So he was indeed assassinated, but not because he was so cruel. Madero was actually pretty much a nice guy who was really trying to build up a liberal democracy in Mexico. Pancho Villa represented the interests of the caudillos and the landlords. That is false. Pancho Villa represented the interests of small farmers and the poor. Miguel Pro was a Catholic priest who was falsely accused of wanting to attack the government and executed. That is true. Lazar Cardenas' disastrous economic policies caused Mexico harm that would take decades for it to recover from. That is false. His economic policies actually worked quite well and helped Mexico enter a period of prosperity and economic development that was actually shared among many different people. Ataturk believed that only a return to pure Islam would save Turkey. That is false. He emphasized building a modern, secular-style government. Gandhi drew exclusively on Indian ideas to develop his ideas of nonviolent resistance. That is false. While he did draw on some Indian ideas, he was also inspired by people like Henry David Thoreau, the great early 19th century American philosopher and transcendentalist. Henry David Thoreau was influenced by Jesus and himself influenced Gandhi. That is true. Benjamin Bayes was influenced by Gandhi and influenced Martin Luther King. That is also true. Yu Kwan Soon was a young Korean woman who helped organize the March First movement. That is true. Chiang Kai-shek united much of China through the Northern Expedition. That is true. The Alawites were the majority ethnic group in Syria who resisted French rule. That is false, right? So a lot of times what would happen is when you would colonize a country, so France colonizes Syria, the majority Arabs who were Sunni, not Shia like the Alawites were, they resisted French rule because they said, hey, if we can kick the French out, we'll be in charge. The minority groups like the Alawites who had been oppressed by the majority ethnic groups were kind of like, if the French leave, that's not necessarily good for us. And the French are like, oh, we can work with the Alawites. We'll use the Alawites as our allies to control the majority. So minorities would often cooperate with a colonizing power because they feared the majority dominating them should that country become independent. And I should stress this is important today because the dictator of Syria, Assad, is an Alawite. And this is one reason why Assad and the other members of his group don't want to give up power because they know they'll be in trouble if they do. Mikhail Mindlin was a factory worker who believed that communism would bring a bright future to the world. That is true. Anastasia Denisova was a political leader who believed that farmers should not learn to read as it would make it difficult for the government to control them. That is false. She went around teaching farmers how to read. And one thing I want to point out, if you're unfamiliar with these names, please do rewatch the video about communism and hope. Ella Shyster was a Soviet electrical engineer who helped design and build power plants. And that's a misspelling. So let's fix that. trying to simulate this to make it as much like a real class as it, or like a in-person class. And I think this is a fun way to do that. I make mistakes in reality. Oh my gosh, I don't know what happened there. Wow, OBS does not apparently like you correcting PowerPoints. But I'm sorry, that was a true statement. Ella Shyster was a Soviet electrical engineer who helped design and build power plants. Kulaks were communist police who were in charge of preventing the reappearance of capitalism. That is false. Kulaks were so-called rich peasants who the communists killed in large numbers. Pelagia Okarenko was a Ukrainian peasant whose family died in a famine caused by communist policies. That is true. The communists followed policies that led to mass starvation in places like the Ukraine. She was the little girl who was able to escape as the people were throwing her still living family members on a cart to take them off to bury them. Vladimir Lenin proposed that a communist revolution was possible when the Communist Party organized workers and served in the vanguard. That is true. Remember, Lenin faced this problem that Marx had predicted that workers would bring the revolution, and it would happen in the most industrialized countries first. But the Soviet Union wasn't very industrialized. But it did have some workers in the cities, and the cities were very important. So Lenin thought, well, if we can organize those workers with a vanguard Communist Party, then we can together lead the revolution and have a victory. And he was correct in this. Through ruthless means, including the use of gulags, Joseph Stalin was able to industrialize the Soviet Union. That is a true statement. Mao Zedong was the leader of the Chinese communists and believed that only through urban workers could China achieve a communist revolution. That is false, and this is where Chinese communists disagreed with Russian communists. Mao Zedong said it would be the people in the countryside that would bring a communist revolution, and Mao Zedong was right. Benito Mussolini was the Italian dictator who copied fascism from Adolf Hitler. That is false. It's actually the reverse. Adolf Hitler copied more from Benito Mussolini. Adolf Hitler rose to power because he won the majority of the German vote. That is false. He never won a majority. So we'll stop there for true and false, and oh my gosh, it does not like this. There we go.